The wind howled outside my old Victorian home that November evening, rattling the windows like it was trying to warn me of the storm brewing inside. I stood in the kitchen, my hands still dusted with flour from rolling out dough for the pumpkin pie I'd spent all morning perfecting. Thanksgiving was 2 days away, and for weeks I'd been planning the menu, picturing the table set with my mother's old china, the same plates we'd used every year since my kids were small. It was supposed to be a day of warmth, of family, of memories stitched together by laughter and gratitude. Instead, I was staring at my phone, my heart sinking into my stomach as I read the message from my son, David. "Dad, you're not invited this year. We're doing things differently. Don't show up." At first, I thought it was a mistake, a cruel prank. My fingers trembled as I typed back, "David, what's going on? Is this a joke?" No reply came. I called him, my voice shaking as the phone rang and rang, each unanswered tone like a nail in a coffin I didn't know was being built. I sank into the chair by the kitchen table, the smell of cinnamon and nutmeg suddenly bitter in the air. My mind raced back to the boy who used to beg me to carve the turkey, his eyes wide with excitement as I'd hand him the first slice. Where had that boy gone? How had my own son, my flesh and blood, decided I was no longer welcome at our family's table? I'm William Harper, a retired school teacher, widowed for 7 years since my Ellen passed. At 67, I'm not the spry man I once was, but I've always prided myself on keeping the family together. David, my eldest, is 42 now, married to Claire, a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. My daughter Sarah is 38. Single, but always chasing something: status, money, a life she saw on glossy magazine covers. We weren't perfect, but we were family. Or so I thought. Over the years, I'd noticed the shift: conversations growing shorter, visits less frequent, their voices tinged with impatience when I spoke. "Dad, we're busy," they'd say. Or, "You don't get how things work now." But this was a knife to the chest. I sat there in the dim light, the pie dough forgotten on the counter, and replayed the last few months in my head. There'd been signs, hadn't there? Claire's tight smile when I'd offered to host Thanksgiving again, saying, "We've got it covered, William." David's vague excuses about why they couldn't stop by for Sunday dinners anymore. Sarah's distracted nods when I'd talk about the past, her eyes glued to her phone. I'd chalked it up to their busy lives. David running his real estate business, Claire managing their social calendar, Sarah chasing her influencer dreams. But now, staring at that cold text, I realized it wasn't just busyness. It was something deeper, something uglier. I tried to picture them gathered without me: David carving the turkey in my place, Claire raising a glass to toast their new traditions, Sarah snapping photos for her followers. The image burned. I'd raised them, sacrificed for them. After Ellen died, I'd poured every ounce of myself into keeping our family whole. I'd paid for David's college, even when it meant dipping into my savings. I'd co-signed Sarah's first apartment lease, even when she defaulted and left me to cover the debt. I'd given them everything, and now they were shutting me out like I was some stranger who'd overstayed his welcome. The phone buzzed again, and my heart leapt, hoping for an apology, an explanation. It was Claire this time. "William, we just think it's better this way. You'd feel out of place. We've invited people who fit our vibe now." Fit their vibe? I'd taught David how to ride a bike in the driveway of this very house. I'd bandaged Sarah's knees when she fell off her skateboard. I'd built this family, brick by brick, and now I was being told I didn't belong? My hands clenched the edge of the table, the wood creaking under my grip. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but something stopped me. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the weight of realizing that the people I loved most had already decided I was disposable. I walked to the living room, where the old photo albums sat on the shelf, gathering dust. I pulled one down, flipping to a picture from Thanksgiving 10 years ago. There we were, Ellen smiling, her apron stained with cranberry sauce. David, barely 30, laughing with a paper turkey hat on his head. Sarah, her braces glinting as she grinned at the camera. I traced my finger over their faces, my throat tightening. What had changed? When had I become the outsider in my own family? I closed the album, the memories too heavy to hold. But as I sat there, something stirred inside me, a flicker of anger, sharp and unfamiliar. They thought they could erase me, write me out of their story. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the fire, the crackling logs the only sound in the house. My mind churned, piecing together the moments that had led to this. Claire's comments about the house being too big for one person, David's questions about my pension, disguised as concern but laced with something else. Sarah's insistence that I should downsize and give them the proceeds to invest. I'd ignored it all, told myself it was just modern life, that they still loved me. But that text, those cold words, stripped away the lies I'd been telling myself. They didn't want me at their table, but they still wanted what I had. And maybe, just maybe, they thought they could take it without me fighting back. The next morning, I stood at the kitchen window, watching the leaves fall in the backyard. The oak tree Ellen and I had planted when we bought this house still stood tall, its branches bare but strong. I'd built this life with my own hands, every nail in the floorboards, every payment on the mortgage, every memory etched into these walls. They thought they could push me out, but this was my home, my legacy. I wasn't going anywhere. And if they thought they could discard me, they were about to learn a lesson they'd never forget. I set the phone down, the screen still glowing with Claire's message. I didn't reply. Instead, I walked to my study, where the old oak desk held years of paperwork, deeds, bank statements, letters. I pulled out a folder I hadn't touched in years, my fingers brushing against the leather cover. Inside was something they didn't know about, something I'd kept quiet even from Ellen. It wasn't much to look at, just a few pages, a few numbers, but it was power. Power they didn't know I had, power I hadn't planned to use. But now, I was ready to play their game. And I was going to win. The fire in the study had burned low, casting long shadows across the room as I sat at my desk, the leather folder still open in front of me. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your chest and makes you feel like you're drowning in your own thoughts. I traced the edges of the documents inside the folder, my mind drifting back to the years that had built this family, the years that had somehow led to this betrayal. I wasn't ready to act yet, not quite. But the anger from last night had settled into something colder, something sharper, and I knew I needed to understand how we'd gotten here before I decided what to do next. I leaned back in my chair, the creak of the wood echoing in the empty house. I thought of David as a boy, his small hand clutching mine as we walked to the park, his laughter filling the air when I'd push him on the swings. He'd been so full of light back then, always asking questions, always wanting to know how things worked. I'd spent hours teaching him how to tie a tie, how to change a tire, how to stand up for himself, without throwing a punch. When Ellen got sick, he was the one who'd sit by her bedside, reading her favorite novels aloud when her eyes grew too weak to read them herself. I'd thought we were unbreakable, the three of us, me, Ellen, and David, against the world. Even after Sarah came along, a surprise blessing when we thought our family was complete, we were a unit, a fortress of love and sacrifice. But life has a way of eroding even the strongest foundations. Ellen's cancer took her too fast, and when she was gone, the house felt like it had lost its heartbeat. I threw myself into keeping the kids close, trying to fill the void she'd left. I worked extra hours at the school, tutoring after hours to pay for David's business degree, even when it meant missing dinners with him. I helped Sarah with her art classes, her endless dreams of making it big, even when she'd spend the money on things I didn't understand, fancy cameras, trips to network in cities I'd never seen. I told myself it was worth it, that every sacrifice was for them. But somewhere along the line, they stopped seeing the sacrifices and started seeing me as, what? A bank? A burden? I remembered the first time I felt the shift. It was maybe 5 years ago, at a family barbecue in the backyard. David had just married Claire, and she'd stood by the grill, her diamond earrings catching the sunlight as she talked about their new condo. I'd overheard her whispering to David, her voice low but sharp. "Your dad's house is so outdated, it's practically a museum. You could sell it for a fortune and invest in something modern." David had laughed, brushing it off. But I saw the way his eyes lingered on the house, like he was calculating its worth. I'd ignored it then, told myself it was just Claire being Claire, always chasing the next shiny thing. But that was the first crack. Sarah wasn't much better. She'd always been my dreamer, my artist. But after Ellen died, her dreams turned into obsessions. She'd come to me with one scheme after another. A blog, a YouTube channel, a clothing line, each one needing money I didn't have to spare. I gave it anyway, dipping into my savings, telling myself she'd find her way. But last year, when I told her I couldn't afford to fund her latest idea, a wellness retreat she wanted to host in Bali, she'd snapped. "You're so stuck in the past, Dad," she'd said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You don't understand how the world works now." I'd stood there, stunned, as she stormed out, leaving me to wonder when my daughter had started seeing me as an obstacle instead of a father. Claire was the real catalyst, though. She'd come into our lives like a storm dressed in designer clothes, all charm and ambition. At first, I'd liked her confidence, her drive. She'd pushed David to start his real estate business, and I'd been proud of him for it. But over time, I saw how she worked him, how she'd whisper ideas that turned his warmth into calculation. She'd look at me across the dinner table with that tight, polite smile, but her eyes were always sizing me up, like I was a piece of furniture she was deciding whether to keep or sell. Last spring, she'd started dropping hints about retirement homes for me, saying things like, "William, don't you want to be somewhere with people your own age? Somewhere less demanding?" I'd laughed it off, but the words stuck, like a splinter under my skin. I closed the folder and stood, walking to the window. The backyard was dark now, the oak tree a silhouette against the night sky. I thought about the last Thanksgiving we'd had together, 2 years ago. It had been tense, Claire complaining about my old-fashioned recipes, Sarah barely looking up from her phone, David distracted by work calls, but we'd still been together, still a family. Or so I'd thought. Now, as I stood in the house that held every memory of our life, I realized they'd been pulling away for years, piece by piece, until I was nothing more than a name on a deed they wanted to claim. The phone rang, shattering the silence. It was David. My heart leapt, a foolish part of me hoping he'd called to apologize, to say it was all a misunderstanding. I answered, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. "David?" "Dad," he said, his tone clipped, businesslike. "Claire told me she texted you. I just wanted to make sure you understood. We're keeping Thanksgiving small this year. Just immediate family. You get it, right? Immediate family." The words hit like a slap. I was his father, the man who'd raised him, loved him, given him everything. And now I wasn't immediate family? I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing my voice to stay calm. "I understand, David. I understand perfectly." There was a pause, and I could almost hear him relax, thinking I'd accepted it. "Good. I knew you'd be reasonable. We'll see you another time, okay?" He hung up before I could respond, leaving me staring at the phone, the silence louder than ever. I walked back to the desk, my eyes falling on the folder again. Inside were documents I'd never told them about, papers tied to an investment I'd made decades ago, back when Ellen and I were young and dreaming of a secure future. It wasn't a fortune, not by today's standards, but it was enough to change things, enough to remind them who I was. They thought they could push me out, take what was mine, and leave me to fade away, but they didn't know the half of it. They didn't know what I was capable of. I sat down, my hands steady now, and pulled out a pen. I wasn't going to beg for a seat at their table. I wasn't going to plead for their love. If they wanted to play this game, I'd play it better. I'd spent my life building something for them, but now I was going to protect what was mine. And maybe, just maybe, I'd teach them what it meant to underestimate me. The morning after David's call, I woke to a house that felt emptier than ever. The sunlight streaming through the kitchen windows did nothing to warm the chill that had settled in my bones. I made coffee, the routine mechanical, my hands moving on autopilot while my mind churned. His words echoed in my head. Immediate family, like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. I'd spent decades building a life for my children, pouring every ounce of myself into their happiness, and now I was being cut out, discarded like an old coat they'd outgrown. I stood by the sink, staring at the backyard where the oak tree stood, its bare branches clawing at the gray November sky. Something inside me was breaking, and I wasn't sure if I could hold it together much longer. I tried to go about my day, to pretend it didn't hurt as much as it did. I swept the porch, dusted the living room, even pulled out the old recipe book to plan a small Thanksgiving meal for myself. But every action felt hollow, like I was performing for an audience that wasn't there. By noon, I couldn't stand the silence anymore. I grabbed my coat and drove to the local diner, a place Ellen and I used to visit when the kids were young. The familiar smell of greasy bacon and burnt coffee greeted me as I slid into a booth, hoping the hum of conversation would drown out the noise in my head. But it didn't. All I could think about was David's voice, so cold, so final, and Claire's text, sharp as a blade. You'd feel out of place. The waitress, a kind woman named Margie who'd known me for years, set a mug of coffee in front of me. "You okay, William?" she asked, her brow furrowing. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a smile, the kind that never reaches your eyes. "Just family stuff, Margie. You know how at Island." She nodded, but her eyes lingered on me, like she could see the weight I was carrying. I sipped the coffee, bitter and too hot, and let my gaze drift to the window. Outside, families were bustling by, carrying grocery bags stuffed with Thanksgiving supplies, turkeys, cranberries, cans of pumpkin puree. I wondered what David and Claire's table would look like without me. Would they even notice I was gone? Would Sarah laugh at one of Claire's barbed jokes, her phone forgotten for once? The thought made my chest ache, a physical pain that spread like wildfire. That evening, I got another call. This time, it was Sarah. I hesitated before answering, my thumb hovering over the screen. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to protect what little dignity I had left, but hope is a stubborn thing. I picked up. "Sarah? Dad," she said, her voice clipped, impatient. "Look, I know you're upset about Thanksgiving, but it's not a big deal. Claire's just trying to keep things elegant. You know, curated. You'd hate it anyway. Curated." The word hit me like a punch. My own daughter, reducing our family's traditions to some trendy buzzword. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles white. "Sarah," I said, my voice low. "I've hosted Thanksgiving every year since before you were born. I taught you how to make Ellen's stuffing. And now you're telling me I don't fit your curated vibe?" She sighed, the sound sharp and exasperated. "Dad, don't make this dramatic. It's just one holiday. Besides, we're trying to move forward. You're always stuck in the past, holding on to this old house, those old stories. It's exhausting. Exhausting." I felt the words settle into me, heavy as a stone. I'd given her everything, every late-night drive to pick her up from parties, every dollar I scraped together for her dreams, every moment I spent trying to keep her mother's memory alive, and I was exhausting? I wanted to scream, to ask her how she could say that to the man who'd raised her, but my throat was too tight. The words, trapped behind a wall of hurt. "I see," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "You'll get over it, Dad," she said, like she was soothing a child. "We'll do something with you later, maybe Christmas." And then she hung up, leaving me in the quiet of my living room, the phone still pressed to my ear. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the faded wallpaper, the photos on the mantel, Ellen's smile, David's gap-toothed grin, Sarah's pigtails. My hands trembled, not with anger now, but with something deeper, something that felt like grief. I'd lost my wife, and now I was losing my children, piece by piece. I thought of walking away, of selling the house, and disappearing to some quiet town where no one knew me. I could start over, leave them to their curated lives, but the thought didn't bring relief. It brought rage. They didn't get to do this to me. They didn't get to take everything and leave me with nothing. I stood and walked to the study, my steps heavier than before. The folder was still on the desk, its contents untouched since last night. I opened it again, my eyes scanning the documents. It was an old investment, a plot of land I'd bought with Ellen back in the 82nds, a risky move we'd made when we were young and full of dreams. We'd never told the kids about it, not because we didn't trust them, but because it was ours, a piece of our shared hope. Over the years, that land had grown in value quietly, steadily, while the world moved on around it. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to shift the ground beneath someone's feet, enough to make them regret underestimating me. I closed the folder, my heart pounding. I wasn't ready to act yet, but the seed was planted. They thought they could erase me, push me out of their lives like I was nothing, but I wasn't nothing. I was William Harper, the man who'd built this family, who'd held it together through loss and pain. They'd forgotten that. They'd forgotten me, but I was going to remind them, not with shouts or tears, but with something colder, something they'd never see coming. I walked to the window, the night pressing against the glass. Somewhere out there, David and Claire were planning their perfect Thanksgiving, Sarah tagging along with her camera and her dreams of likes and followers. They thought they held all the cards, that I was just an old man clinging to memories. But they didn't know about the folder. They didn't know about the land. And they didn't know that every word, every slight, every betrayal was carving their names deeper into a debt they'd soon have to pay. The days leading up to Thanksgiving felt like wading through mud, each step heavier than the last. The house, once alive with the chatter of my children and Ellen's laughter, now seemed to mock me with its silence. I moved through my routines, watering the plants, checking the mail, wiping down the already spotless kitchen counter, but my mind was elsewhere, caught in a loop of David's cold voice, Sarah's dismissive sigh, Claire's calculated words. I'd spent my life believing family was a bond that couldn't break, but they'd proven me wrong. And yet, as I sat in the study that night, the folder of documents open on the desk, something shifted inside me. The pain was still there, sharp and raw, but beneath it, a new resolve was taking shape. I wasn't going to let them bury me. Not yet. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking under my weight, and stared at the ceiling. The memory of Sarah's call still burned. "You're always stuck in the past, Dad." Stuck in the past? I'd given them everything to build their futures. The late nights grading papers so I could afford David's tuition. The second mortgage I took out to help Sarah chase her dreams. The years I spent swallowing my grief over Ellen to keep them from falling apart. If that was being stuck, then so be it. But I wasn't going to be their doormat anymore. I closed the folder, my fingers lingering on the leather, and made a decision. I wasn't going to confront them, not yet. But I was done playing the fool. The next morning, I drove into town, the air crisp with the promise of winter. I stopped at the office of an old friend, Tom Reynolds, a lawyer who'd known Ellen and me since our college days. His office smelled of coffee and old books, a comforting contrast to the sterile chaos of my thoughts. Tom leaned back in his chair, his glasses perched on his nose, and listened as I laid out the situation, not the full story, not yet, but enough. The texts, the exclusion, the way Claire's eyes always seemed to linger on my house like it was a prize she was already measuring. Tom didn't interrupt, just nodded, his face unreadable, but his eyes sharp. "William," he said when I finished, "you've got options. That land you and Ellen bought, it's worth more than you think. The market's hot right now, especially for commercial development. You could sell it, or you could leverage it. Either way, it's yours, not theirs. They don't even know it exists, do they?" I shook my head. "Never told them. It was ours. Mine and Ellen's. Something we kept for ourselves." Tom's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "Smart move. If they're trying to push you out, they're in for a surprise." You want me to start looking into things? Make sure your assets are locked down? I nodded, my voice steady. Do it quietly, Tom. I don't want them to know anything's coming. Not yet. He jotted a note, his pen scratching against the paper. You got it. I'll pull the deeds, check the titles, make sure everything's airtight. You just say the word when you're ready to move. I left his office feeling lighter, like I'd taken the first step out of the fog. For years I'd let them take and take, telling myself it was what parents did. But now standing on the sidewalk as the town bustled around me, I felt something new, a clarity, a purpose. They thought they could erase me, but I was still here, still standing. And I had something they didn't expect. When I got home, the mailbox was stuffed with the usual bills and flyers, but one envelope caught my eye. It was from David's real estate company, a glossy brochure about downsizing for a simpler life. Inside, a handwritten note from Claire. William, thought this might interest you. We could help you sell the house and find something more manageable. Let's talk soon. The words were polite, but I could hear her voice behind them, smooth and predatory. Sell the house. Move somewhere manageable. I crumpled the note, my jaw tight. They weren't even pretending anymore. They wanted me out, my home in their hands, my life reduced to a tidy profit for their curated world. I didn't call them, didn't text. Instead, I walked to the garage, where boxes of old paperwork were stacked in the corner. I spent hours sorting through them, pulling out anything tied to the house, the land, my pension. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, not exactly, but I knew I needed to be ready. As I worked, I remembered a conversation with Ellen years ago when we'd bought that land. We'd been sitting on the porch, the kids asleep upstairs, and she'd laughed, her eyes bright. This is our safety net, Will, she'd said. Our little secret. No matter what happens, we'll always have this. I hadn't thought about it much after she died. Grief has a way of burying dreams, but now, that safety net felt like a lifeline. That evening, the phone rang again, Claire this time. I let it go to voicemail, her voice spilling into the quiet house. William, it's me, just checking in about the house. David and I think it's time to talk seriously about your future. Call me back. I deleted the message, my hand steady now. She thought she was in control, that I'd roll over and hand them everything. But I was done being their pawn. I wasn't going to shout or beg. I was going to watch, wait, and plan. I went back to the study. The folder open again. The land was the key, but it wasn't the only card I held. There were other things, savings I'd tucked away, investments I'd never mentioned, connections like Tom who owed me loyalty. They thought I was just an old man, clinging to a house too big for one. They didn't know the half of it. They didn't know that every slight, every cold word was building a fire inside me. And soon they'd feel the heat. I closed the folder and leaned back, the house settling around me like an old friend. Thanksgiving was tomorrow, and they'd be gathered without me, laughing, toasting, pretending I didn't exist. Let them think they'd won. They had no idea the ground was already shifting beneath them. They had no idea that I was rewriting the rules of their game. Thanksgiving morning dawned cold and gray, the sky heavy with clouds that mirrored the weight in my chest. I stood at the kitchen window, a mug of coffee gone cold in my hands, imagining David's house across town, Claire, setting out her curated table, Sarah snapping photos for her followers, the clink of wine glasses filling a space where I didn't belong. I could have let it break me, let the image of their laughter without me pull me under. But instead, I felt something else, a calm, like the quiet before a storm. They thought they'd written me out of their story, but I was already drafting a new chapter. One they wouldn't see coming. I set the mug down and walked to the study, where the folder lay waiting. I didn't open it this time. I didn't need to. The documents inside the deed to the land, the investment records were etched in my mind, a map of power I'd forgotten I held. I'd spent years giving, sacrificing, letting them take pieces of me without question. Now, I was done giving. I was taking control, not with anger or tears, but with the kind of precision that comes from knowing exactly what you're capable of. I called Tom Reynolds that morning, my voice steady as I spoke. Tom, I want you to move forward. Lock everything down, house, land, accounts. Make sure nothing can be touched without my say-so, and start looking into how we can leverage that land. I want options. Tom didn't hesitate. I'm on it, William. I'll have the paperwork ready by next week. Anything else? I paused, glancing at the photo of Ellen on the desk, her smile soft and steady. Keep it quiet, I said. They don't need to know yet. Understood, he replied, and I could hear the hint of a grin in his voice. Tom had always liked a good fight, especially one where the underdog came out on top. After the call, I felt lighter, like I'd shed a layer of the grief that had clung to me since David's text. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was moving, planning, building something they couldn't tear down. I spent the rest of the day in the study, sorting through more paperwork, making notes, sketching out ideas. The land Ellen and I had bought was in a prime spot now, surrounded by new developments, strip malls, office parks, condos. Tom had said it could fetch a high price, or I could develop it myself, turn it into something that would outlast me. Either way, it was mine to wield, a weapon they didn't know I had. By evening, the house smelled of the small Thanksgiving meal I'd made for myself, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, a slice of the pumpkin pie I'd baked before everything fell apart. I sat at the dining table, the chair across from me empty, and ate in silence. It wasn't the feast I'd planned, but it was enough. As I chewed, I thought about David's table, about the way Claire would be holding court, her voice sharp and polished, while David nodded along and Sarah chased clout with her phone. They thought they were untouchable, that they'd moved on to a world where I didn't matter. But they were wrong. The phone buzzed as I was clearing the dishes. It was Claire again, her name flashing on the screen like a warning. I let it go to voicemail, her voice dripping with false warmth. William, just wanted to wish you a happy Thanksgiving. We missed you today, but it was such a lovely gathering. Let's connect soon about the house, okay? Take care. I deleted the message before she finished, my jaw tight. Missed me? She didn't miss me. She missed the idea of my house, my money, my compliance. I could picture her now, sipping wine, her eyes scanning David's dining room, already planning how to redecorate my home once they convinced me to sell. I didn't call back. Instead, I went back to the study and pulled out a notepad. I started writing names, people I hadn't spoken to in years, but who owed me favors. There was Margaret, a real estate developer who'd been a friend of Ellen's, who'd once said she'd love to work with me if I ever wanted to develop that land. There was Paul, a banker who'd handled my accounts for decades, who'd know how to move money quietly. And there was Tom, already on my side, ready to tie every loose end into a knot they couldn't untangle. I wasn't just an old man in a big house. I was a man with resources, with connections, with a past they'd underestimated. The next day, Claire showed up at my door, unannounced. I saw her through the window, her coat expensive and impractical, her hair perfect despite the wind. I opened the door, my face a mask of calm. Claire, I said, stepping aside to let her in. What brings you here? She smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Just checking on you, William. Yesterday was so busy, but I felt bad about you being alone. Thought I'd drop by. I nodded, letting her talk, watching the way her eyes flicked around the living room, lingering on the antique clock, the oak table, the fireplace. It's a lot of house for one person, she said, her tone casual but pointed. David and I were talking, and we think you'd be so much happier in a smaller place. Somewhere cozy, low maintenance. We could handle the sale for you, make it easy. I smiled. The same calm mask I'd worn all day. That's thoughtful, Claire. I'll think about it. Her eyes narrowed slightly, like she sensed something off but couldn't place it. Good, she said, adjusting her scarf. We just want what's best for you. She left soon after, her heels clicking on the porch as she walked back to her car. I watched her drive away, my hands steady now. She thought she was playing me, but I was the one holding the board. That night, I called Margaret, the real estate developer. "William," she said, her voice warm with surprise. "It's been too long. What's on your mind?" "I'm thinking about that land Ellen and I bought," I said, wondering what it could be worth now, or what we could do with it. She laughed, the sound rich and knowing. "Oh, William, you've been sitting on a gold mine. Let me run some numbers and get back to you. You thinking of selling or building?" "Building," I said, the word solid in my mouth. "Something that lasts." As I hung up, I felt the pieces falling into place. They thought they'd won, that I was just an old man they could push aside. But every word they spoke, every move they made, was tightening the noose they didn't even see. I wasn't just fighting for my house or my pride. I was fighting for everything I'd built, everything Ellen and I had dreamed of, and I was going to make sure they felt the weight of their own greed. The days after Thanksgiving blurred into a quiet rhythm, the kind that fools you into thinking nothing's changing when, in truth, everything island. I went about my routine coffee in the morning, a walk to the mailbox, a few hours in the garden, pulling weeds from the frost-hardened soil. But beneath the surface, I was a man at work, each step deliberate, each moment a piece of a puzzle I was assembling in secret. Claire's visit had lit a fire under me, not the burning kind that makes you reckless, but the slow, steady kind that keeps you warm through a long winter. They thought they had me figured out, that I was just a lonely old man rattling around in a house too big for him. They didn't see the storm gathering, and I wasn't about to let them. Claire called again a few days later, her voice as smooth as ever, but there was an edge to it now, a hint of impatience. "William, have you thought about what we talked about? The house, I mean. David's got a buyer lined up, someone who'd pay top dollar. You could be settled somewhere new by spring." I leaned against the kitchen counter, the phone pressed to my ear, my face a mask of calm she couldn't see. "I'm still thinking, Claire," I said, my voice even, almost gentle. "It's a big decision. You wouldn't want me to rush, would you?" There was a pause, a faint huff of frustration on her end. "Of course not. But we're just trying to help. You don't want to be stuck in that drafty old place forever, do you?" I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "It's not so bad. I've got my memories here." I let the words hang, heavy with meaning she didn't catch. She muttered something about checking in later and hung up, leaving me in the quiet of my kitchen. I set the phone down and glanced at the folder on the counter, its leather cover worn but solid. She thought she was steering the ship, but I was the one charting the course. That afternoon, I met with Tom Reynolds again, this time at a coffee shop on the edge of town, far from prying eyes. He slid a manila envelope across the table, his face serious, but with a glint of excitement in his eyes. "Everything's locked down," he said, keeping his voice low. "The house is untouchable deeds in your name. No liens, no loopholes. The land's the same. I've got the title records here, clean as a whistle, and Margaret called me yesterday. She's got a developer interested in your plot big money if you want to sell, or a partnership if you want to build." I took the envelope, my fingers brushing the paper. "What kind of money are we talking?" Tom leaned forward, his voice dropping further. "Enough to make your kid's head spin. 7 figures, easy, if you sell outright. More if you develop it smart. But William, you need to decide what you want. This kind of move, it's a statement." I nodded, my mind already turning. A statement. That's exactly what it would be. Not a shout, not a scream, but a quiet, unshakable declaration that I wasn't the man they thought I was. "Let's hold off on selling," I said. "I want to build something. Something that lasts." Tom grinned, like he'd been waiting for me to say it. "That's the William I know. I'll set up a meeting with Margaret. You tell me when you're ready to pull the trigger." I left the coffee shop with the envelope tucked under my arm, the weight of it grounding me. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. They could have their curated Thanksgiving, their perfect little lives, but I was building something they couldn't touch, something that would outlast their greed. When I got home, there was a message from Sarah on the answering machine, her voice bright but brittle, like she was trying too hard. "Dad, just wanted to say hi. I know things got weird with Thanksgiving, but we're good, right? Maybe you can come over for coffee or something. Oh, and Claire mentioned the house thing. Sounds like a great idea. Call me." I stood there, listening to her words, the way they danced around the truth. She wasn't calling to check on me. She was calling to keep me in line, to make sure I didn't derail their plans. Deleted the message without calling back. Let her think I was still the same old dad, pliable and predictable. Let them all think that. A few days later, I noticed the first crack in their confidence. David called, his voice tighter than usual. "Dad, I was going through some paperwork, and there's a weird issue with the property taxes on your house. Looks like they're higher than we thought. You sure you're okay handling all that? Claire and I can take a look if you want." I leaned back in my chair, the phone cradled against my shoulder. "Don't worry, David. I've got it under control. Always have." He hesitated, like he was waiting for me to say more, to invite him in. When I didn't, he cleared his throat. "Right. Well, let me know if you need help. We're just looking out for you." "Of course," I said, my voice smooth as glass. "Thanks for the concern." I hung up before he could respond, my pulse steady. He wasn't worried about me. He was worried about the house, about the money he thought was already his. But Tom had already checked the taxes. Everything was paid. Everything was clean. David's call wasn't about concern. It was a fishing expedition, and I wasn't taking the bait. I started noticing other things, too. Claire's visits became more frequent, her smiles tighter, her questions sharper. "Have you thought about a retirement community, William? They're so nice these days, like resorts." Sarah texted me photos of condos, each one accompanied by a cheery message about simplifying your life. They were circling, testing, trying to push me into a corner. But every time they pushed, I smiled, nodded, gave them nothing. They thought I was weak, that I'd fold under their pressure. They didn't see the moves I was making, the meetings with Tom, the calls with Margaret, the quiet steps I was taking to secure what was mine. One night, as I sat in the study, the phone rang again. It was Claire, her voice clipped. "William, we're having a family meeting this weekend. About the house. You should be there. It's important." I let the silence stretch, just long enough to make her squirm. "I'll see if I can make it," I said, my tone light but firm. "I've been busy." "Busy?" she repeated, a note of disbelief in her voice. "William, this is about your future." "I know," I said, and I let the words hang heavy with meaning she didn't catch. "I'm taking care of my future just fine." I hung up, my heart steady, my mind clear. They thought they were building a wall around me, trapping me in their plans. But they didn't realize the ground beneath them was already cracking, that every step they took was bringing them closer to a fall they couldn't imagine. I wasn't just an old man in a big house. I was a man with a plan, and I was playing to win. The weekend arrived with a biting wind that rattled the windows of my old Victorian home, as if the world itself was restless, sensing the shift I'd been building toward. Claire's family meeting was scheduled for Sunday afternoon at David's house, a sleek, modern monstrosity that screamed Claire's taste glass walls, sharp angles, no warmth. I'd spent the days leading up to it preparing, not with words or arguments, but with the kind of quiet precision that comes from knowing you hold the upper hand. Tom had sent over the finalized documents, everything locked down tighter than a vault. The house, the land, my accounts, every piece of my life was secured, untouchable. And the land, that forgotten plot Ellen and I had bought decades ago, was now the key to everything. Margaret had confirmed it. A developer was ready to partner, offering a deal that would turn that quiet patch of earth into a legacy worth millions. They didn't know it yet, but David, Claire, and Sarah were about to learn what it meant to underestimate me. I arrived at David's house just after noon, my old pickup truck, looking out of place among the polished SUVs in their driveway. Claire greeted me at the door, her smile tight, her eyes scanning me like she was looking for cracks in my armor. "William," she said, her voice dripping with false warmth, "so glad you could make it. Come in, we're all waiting." Inside, the house smelled of lavender candles and expensive wine, the kind of scent that tries too hard to impress. David sat at the head of their long glass dining table, his laptop open, papers spread out like he was preparing for a board meeting. Sarah was there too, her phone in hand, her face a mix of boredom and unease. The air was thick with expectation, but not the kind they thought. I took a seat, my hands folded calmly in my lap, and waited. Let them make the first move. David cleared his throat, his eyes flicking to Claire before settling on me. "Dad, we wanted to talk about the house. It's too much for you to handle alone, and frankly, it's not practical anymore. Claire's found a great buyer, someone who'd pay well above market value. You could move somewhere smaller, easier to manage. We'd handle everything, make it seamless." Claire jumped in, her voice smooth as silk. "We've even found a lovely retirement community nearby. It's got everything: activities, dining, no maintenance. You'd be so much happier, William." I looked at them, my face unreadable. Happier. As if they cared about my happiness. I could see it in their eyes, the hunger, the certainty that they'd already won. Sarah shifted in her seat, her fingers tapping her phone, avoiding my gaze. I let the silence stretch, just long enough to make them squirm. Then I leaned forward, my voice calm but firm. "You're talking about selling my house, David, the one I built with your mother, the one I paid off with 30 years of work. You sure that's what you want?" David frowned, like he hadn't expected resistance. "Dad, it's not about taking anything from you. It's about what's best. The market's hot right now. You'd make a fortune. We'd invest it for you, make sure you're set for life." I nodded slowly, as if considering it. "And the buyer? Who are they?" Claire's smile flickered, just for a moment. "A developer. They're looking to build condos. It's a great opportunity." I leaned back, my eyes locked on hers. "Condos, huh? Funny thing, Tom was telling me about some land I own. You know, that plot your mother and I bought years ago? Turns out it's in the path of a big development zone. Worth a lot more than this house, actually. And it's not for sale. Not to your buyer, anyway." The room went still. David's mouth opened, then closed, like a fish gasping for air. Claire's smile froze, her eyes narrowing. "Land?" she said, her voice too sharp. "What land?" I shrugged, casual as could be. "Just something we tucked away. You wouldn't know about it. Never came up." Sarah finally looked up from her phone, her brow furrowed. "Dad, you never mentioned any land. Where is it?" "What's it worth?" I met her gaze, my voice steady. "Enough, Sarah, more than enough." David leaned forward, his hands gripping the table. "Dad, come on, you're not making sense. If you've got some property, we should talk about it. As a family, we can help you manage it." I smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach your eyes. "Oh, I'm managing just fine. Tom's got everything under control. Papers are signed, titles are clear. You don't need to worry about it." Claire's face tightened, her lips pressing into a thin line. "William, this is a lot to take in. Why don't we all take a step back and discuss this rationally? We're just trying to look out for you." I stood, my chair scraping against the polished floor. "I appreciate the concern," I said, my voice low and deliberate. "But I've been looking out for myself for a long time, and I'm not done yet." I walked out, leaving them in stunned silence, their perfect plan unraveling at the seams. As I climbed into my truck, I could feel their eyes on me through the window, their confusion a palpable thing. They'd thought they could push me into a corner, take what was mine, and leave me with nothing. But I'd just played my first card, and it had shaken them. They weren't sure what I had, how much I knew, or what I was planning. And that uncertainty, that was my power. I drove home, the envelope from Tom on the seat beside me. Inside were the details of the land deal. a partnership with Margaret's developer friend, a plan to build a community center, something that would carry Ellen's name and stand as a testament to the life we'd built. It wasn't just about the money, though the money was substantial. It was about legacy, about proving I wasn't the relic they thought I was. They'd tried to erase me, but I was rewriting the story. That night, as I sat in the study, the phone rang. It was David again, his voice tighter than before. "Dad, what's going on? This land you mentioned, what are you doing with it? We need to talk about this." I leaned back, the folder open in front of me. "We'll talk, David," I said. "When I'm ready." I hung up before he could argue, my heart steady. They were rattled, grasping for control, but they didn't realize they'd already lost the first round. This was just the beginning. The real strike was still to come, and when it landed, they'd feel it in a way they'd never forget. The air in the house felt different now, sharper, like the world had tilted just enough to change the light. I woke each morning with a purpose I hadn't felt in years, the kind that steadies your hands and clears your mind. David's call after the family meeting had been the first crack in their facade, his voice betraying a nervousness I'd never heard before. Claire's polished confidence was fraying, and Sarah, who'd always followed her brother's lead, was starting to question the ground they stood on. They'd thought they could push me out, take my home, my life, and leave me with nothing but memories. But I was done being their ghost. I was taking it all back, piece by piece, and they were only just beginning to feel the weight of it. I met with Margaret the following week at her office. A sleek space downtown, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the growing sprawl of the city. She spread out blueprints and spreadsheets, her enthusiasm infectious as she talked about the land Ellen and I had bought all those years ago. "William, this is a gold mine," she said, tapping a map that showed our plots surrounded by new developments. "The developer I'm working with wants to build a mixed-use complex, shops, offices, a community center with Ellen's name on it, just like you wanted. You'd retain a stake, get a steady income, and leave a legacy. Or you could sell outright for a lump sum that'd make your kids' eyes pop out." I leaned back, the numbers swimming in my head. 7 figures, maybe 8 if we played it right. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about control, about showing them I wasn't the frail old man they thought they could bully. "Let's go with the development," I said. "I want something that lasts, something they can't touch." Margaret nodded, her eyes gleaming with respect. "I'll get the contracts drawn up. Tom's already vetted them, everything's airtight. You just say when and we'll move." I left her office with a copy of the preliminary agreement, the weight of it solid in my hands. The land was mine, always had been, but now it was more than a secret kept in a folder. It was a weapon, one I was ready to wield. I drove home, the winter sun low in the sky, and thought about the years I'd spent giving everything to David and Sarah, my time, my money, my heart. They'd taken it all and spat in my face, thinking I had nothing left to fight with. They were wrong. That evening, Claire showed up again, this time with David in tow. They stood on my porch, their faces a mix of determination and unease, like they were bracing for a battle but weren't sure they'd win. I let them in, my expression calm, almost welcoming. Let them think they still had the upper hand. "William," Claire started, her voice clipped, "we need to talk about this land you mentioned. David says you've never talked about it before. We're a family, we should be making these decisions together." I raised an eyebrow, leaning against the kitchen counter. "Together? Like we did for Thanksgiving?" David flinched, his jaw tightening. "Dad, that's not fair. We just wanted a smaller gathering. This is different. If you've got assets we don't know about, we need to understand what's going on." "For your sake, for my sake," I repeated, my voice low, almost amused. "That's generous of you, David, but I've got it handled. Tom's looking after everything. You don't need to worry." Claire's eyes narrowed, her composure slipping. "William, we're trying to help. If this land is worth something, you could use it to secure your future. Move somewhere comfortable. Let us manage the details." I smiled, the kind of smile that cuts deeper than words. "My future's secure, Claire. Always has been. You'd be surprised what I've been holding on to all these years. David's face paled, his hands fidgeting with the edge of his coat. Dad, what are you talking about? What's going on? I shrugged, casual as could be. Just tying up loose ends. You'll see soon enough. They left shortly after, their voices low and tense as they walked to their car. I watched them through the window, their silhouettes sharp against the dusk. They were scrambling now, trying to figure out what I knew, what I had, but they were too late. The wheels were already turning, and I wasn't stopping them. The next day, Tom called with news. Got a call from David's lawyer, he said, his voice dry with amusement. They're sniffing around, trying to dig up records on the land. Seems they're worried you're making moves without them. I shut it down, told them everything's private, and locked tight. They didn't like that. I chuckled, a sound I hadn't heard from myself in months. Good. Let them squirm. They're more than squirming, Tom said. I heard from a contact at the bank David tried to pull some strings, see if he could access your accounts. Didn't get far. Your name's on everything, and I made sure it's ironclad. I nodded, my mind racing. They were desperate now, grasping at straws, thinking they could still control the narrative. But the narrative was mine now. I'd spent years letting them take the lead, letting them think they could walk over me. No more. Every step I took now, the calls with Margaret, the meetings with Tom, the quiet transfer of assets, was a brick in the wall I was building around what was mine. By the end of the week, the cracks in their world were widening. Sarah called, her voice shaky, not with anger but with something closer to fear. Dad, what's going on? David says you're hiding things from us. This land, these plans. What are you doing? I kept my voice steady, almost gentle. I'm just taking care of business, Sarah, like I always have. She hesitated, her breath catching. Dad, we're family. You don't have to do this alone. I let the silence stretch, let her feel the weight of it. You made it clear I'm not part of your family anymore, I said. You don't get to pick and choose when I'm useful. She didn't respond, and I hung up, my heart steady but heavy. They were turning on each other now. I could feel it. David blaming Claire for pushing too hard. Sarah blaming David for not handling me better. Their perfect little alliance was crumbling, and I hadn't even played my full hand yet. I sat in the study that night, the folder open in front of me, the blueprints from Margaret spread across the desk. The community center would be beautiful open spaces, a garden in Ellen's name, a place for people to gather and build something real. It was everything they weren't, everything they'd tried to take from me. They thought they could strip me bare, but I was taking it all back, my home, my legacy, my dignity, and they were only just beginning to realize how much they'd lost. Winter settled over the town like a heavy blanket, the kind that smothers sound and sharpens every shadow. I stood at the front window of my house, watching the first snowflakes dust the lawn, my breath fogging the glass. The world outside was quiet, but inside me, a storm was raging, not the wild, destructive kind, but the cold, deliberate kind that reshapes everything in its path. David, Claire, and Sarah were unraveling, their carefully constructed world cracking under the weight of their own greed. I'd played my first cards carefully, dropping just enough to shake them, to make them question their control. Now, the game was spilling into the open, and they were about to learn what happens when you push a man too far. The first sign of their public downfall came unexpectedly, in the form of a phone call from Margie, the waitress at the diner. Her voice was low, conspiratorial, the kind of tone people use when they're sharing something they shouldn't. William, she said, you've got to hear this. Claire was in here yesterday, all high and mighty as usual, but she was off, snapping at the staff, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Word around town is David's business is in trouble, some big deal fell through. People are talking. I leaned against the counter, my heart steady but my mind racing. Talking? What were they saying? Margie chuckled, a sound laced with satisfaction. Oh, you know how it goes. Folks notice David's been losing clients. That fancy office of his downtown? Half the staff's gone. And Claire's been trying to keep up appearances, but people see through it. They're saying the family's not as golden as they thought. I thanked her and hung up, a grim smile tugging at my lips. I hadn't planned for their collapse to go public so soon, but I wasn't surprised. David's real estate business had always been built on flash big promises, bigger loans, and Claire's knack for charming investors. But charm only goes so far when the numbers don't add up. And I'd made sure they wouldn't. A quiet call to Paul at the bank had ensured David's latest loan application hit a wall. Nothing illegal, just a reminder that my name still carried weight in this town. They thought they could take my home, my legacy, but they were losing their own empire, brick by brick. The next day, I got a call from Tom. "William, you're gonna want to sit down for this," he said, his voice brimming with barely contained glee. "David tried to pull a fast one, had his lawyer file a claim on your house, saying you're not fit to manage it. Some nonsense about mental decline. I shut it down before it even hit a judge's desk. Showed them the paperwork, proved everything's in your name, and threatened a countersuit for harassment. They backed off real quick. I gripped the phone, my jaw tight. Mental decline? The audacity of it burned, but it also sharpened my resolve. "They're desperate," I said. "Desperate's an understatement," Tom replied. "They're hemorrhaging money. That deal they were banking on, the one tied to your house, it's dead. The buyer pulled out. When they found out, you weren't selling." Words spreading, William. People are starting to see them for what they are. I hung up, my pulse steady but my mind alight. The town was small enough that gossip spread like wildfire, and David and Claire's polished image was starting to crack. I'd heard whispers at the grocery store, seen the sidelong glances from neighbors who used to fawn over Claire's charity galas. Now they were talking about her canceled events, David's empty office, Sarah's sudden absence from her usual social media spotlight. They'd built their lives on appearances, but appearances are fragile, and I was dismantling theirs with every move. Claire showed up at my door that evening, her face pale, her usual polish replaced by a brittleness I hadn't seen before. "William," she said, her voice tight, "we need to talk. This land you mentioned, the plans you're making, it's causing problems. David's business is suffering. People are talking, saying things that aren't true. We're family. You don't want this, do you?" I stood in the doorway, my arms crossed, my expression unreadable. "What do I want, Claire? You tell me. You've been so sure you know what's best for me." Her eyes flashed, a mix of anger and fear. "We're just trying to protect you. This house, this land, it's too much for you to handle. Let us help. We can fix this." I stepped closer, my voice low, each word deliberate. "Fix what, Claire? The fact that you tried to take my home? That you told me I wasn't welcome at your table? You thought you could push me out, but you're the ones losing everything." She flinched, her composure crumbling. "William, that's not fair. We never meant—" "Enough," I said, cutting her off. "You meant every word, every choice. You don't get to rewrite it now." She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing, no words coming out. For the first time, she looked small, not the commanding presence who'd tried to orchestrate my life. She turned and left without another word, her heels clicking unevenly on the porch steps. I watched her go, the snow falling softly around her, and felt no pity. She'd made her choices. They all had. By the end of the week, the cracks in their world were impossible to hide. A local paper ran a story about David's business troubles, nothing damning, just a dry report about financial difficulties and canceled projects. But in a town like ours, that was enough. Neighbors stopped inviting Claire to their book clubs. Sarah's influencer account went silent, her usual stream of photos replaced by vague posts about taking a break. David was seen at the diner, alone, his tie loosened, his face drawn. They were imploding, turning on each other as the pressure mounted. I heard from Margie that David and Claire had been overheard arguing in their car, their voices loud enough to draw stares. Sarah had called David, begging him to fix it, only to be told there was nothing left to fix. I sat in my study that night, the blueprints for the community center spread out before me. Ellen's name would be carved above the entrance, a testament to the life we'd built, the love we'd shared. They'd tried to take it all, my home, my dignity, my place in their world. But I'd taken it back, and now they were the ones standing in the wreckage. They thought losing money was the worst of it. But money can be regained. Reputation, respect, trust, those were gone forever. And I wasn't done. The final blow was still waiting, and when it landed, they'd understand the true cost of their betrayal. The snow fell heavier now, blanketing the town in a silence that felt like judgment. I stood in my study, the folder of documents closed on the desk, its contents no longer a secret, but a sword I'd wielded with precision. The past weeks had been a slow unraveling for David, Claire, and Sarah, their world crumbling under the weight of their own choices. I hadn't shouted or fought. I'd let their greed do the work, let it tear them apart from the inside. But now, as winter tightened its grip, it was time to end it. Time to deliver the final blow that would leave no doubt who held the power. They'd tried to erase me from their lives, but I was about to rewrite their ending. It started with a letter, delivered to David's office by courier on a Monday morning. I'd had Tom draft it, every word sharp and final, like the closing of a door. It outlined the deal I'd signed with Margaret's developer, a partnership to transform the land. Ellen and I had bought into a community center, complete with a garden in her name, a place for the town to gather, to build memories that would outlast us all. The letter made it clear. The land was mine, always had been, and no claim they could dream up would change that. But the real sting was in the details I'd included, almost as an afterthought. The house, my house, was also untouchable, its title secured, its value tied to a trust that excluded them entirely. I'd left nothing for them to take, no crack for them to slip through. I didn't hear from David directly, but Tom called me that afternoon, his voice laced with grim satisfaction. "They got the letter," he said. "David's lawyer called me, practically shouting about how they're entitled to a share, how you can't do this to family. I told him to take it to court if he wants, but they've got nothing. The paperwork's ironclad, William. They're done." I nodded, staring out the window at the snow-covered oak tree in the backyard. "Good," I said. "Let them try." They didn't try. Not really. The next day, Claire showed up at my door, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed, the polish she'd always worn like armor, now nowhere to be seen. "William," she said, her voice breaking as she stood on the porch, snow clinging to her coat. "Please. We didn't mean for it to go this far. David's business is collapsing. Sarah's a mess. We're losing everything. You can't do this to us." I stood in the doorway, my arms crossed, my expression cold. "Do what, Claire? Give you what you wanted? You told me I didn't fit your world. You wanted the house, the money, the control. I'm just making sure you don't get it." Her eyes widened, a flash of panic crossing her face. "That's not fair. We were trying to help you, to make things easier." "Enough," I said, my voice cutting through hers like a blade. "You didn't want me at your table. You didn't want me in your lives. You thought you could take everything and leave me with nothing. But this is my home, my legacy. And you're not part of it anymore." She stared at me, tears welling but not falling, her hands trembling at her sides. For a moment, I thought she might beg, might fall to her knees in the snow. But she just turned and walked away, her shoulders hunched, her steps unsteady. I closed the door, the sound final, like the end of a chapter I'd never wanted to write. Sarah was next. She called that evening, her voice raw, no trace of the bright influencer persona she'd cultivated. "Dad," she said, the word cracking. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. I got caught up in it all. Claire's ideas, David's plans. I didn't think it would hurt you. I sat in the study, the blueprints for the community center spread out before me. You didn't think, Sarah," I said, my voice steady but heavy. You chose to push me out, to treat me like I was nothing. You don't get to take that back now." "Dad, please," she said, her voice breaking into a sob. "We're family. I'll make it right. Just tell me how." I closed my eyes, the weight of her words pressing against the wall I'd built around my heart. "You can't," I said. "Not anymore." I hung up, the silence that followed heavier than any word she could have said. David didn't call. Didn't show up. I heard from Margie at the diner that he'd been seen packing boxes at his office, his face drawn, his tie gone. The business was dead, its clients gone, its loans called in. Claire had stopped showing up at her usual haunts. Her charity galas canceled. Her name whispered in pity instead of admiration. Sarah's social media accounts were deleted, her curated life erased as if it had never existed. They'd turned on each other, just as I'd known they would. David blaming Claire for pushing too hard, Claire blaming Sarah for not reining him in, Sarah blaming them both for dragging her into their mess. Their unity, their strength, had been a mirage, and now it was gone. I didn't gloat, didn't celebrate. I stood in my home, the walls filled with memories of Ellen, of the children they used to be, and felt a quiet strength settle over me. The community center would break ground in the spring. Ellen's name carved in stone. A gift to the town that had stood by me. The house, my house, would stay mine, a sanctuary for the years I had left. And the money from the land deal, part of it went to the trust, part to a scholarship fund in Ellen's name, for kids like the ones I used to teach, kids who deserved a chance. None of it went to them. They'd wanted a fortune, but they'd lost something far more valuable: trust, respect, family. As I sat by the fire that night, the snow falling outside, I thought about the life Ellen and I had built. We dreamed of a legacy, of a family that would carry our love forward. They'd tried to take that from me, to reduce it to dollars and deals, but I'd held fast. And now they were the ones left with nothing. Not a house, not a name, not even each other. I didn't raise my voice or lift a hand. I didn't need to. Justice had spoken for me, cold and final, in the language of their own making. I closed the folder one last time. Its contents no longer a weapon but a promise kept. They'd thought they could build their empire on my ruins, but no house built on betrayal can stand. As the fire crackled, I felt the weight of the past lift, replaced by a freedom I hadn't known I'd lost. I was William Harper, and I was still here, standing tall in the home I'd built, the life I'd earned. And they were just shadows now, fading into the snow, left with nothing but the echoes of their own greed.